When she first arrived, I wasn't sure whether to be terrified, intrigued, or slightly hungry, though probably that last one was just human nerves. Standing in my living room, she looked almost like a human, but not quite. Her eyes were a little too luminous, her skin shimmered faintly, and there was this constant faint hum around her, like some alien version of a romantic soundtrack that insisted on playing itself. She didn't smile immediately. Instead, she scanned the room with the precision of someone calculating the best way to reorganize it for optimal emotional bonding. That was when I noticed the small device clipped to her belt, blinking like it was keeping track of my heartbeat, my emotional state, and possibly my snack choices. "I have studied humans extensively," she said in that strangely melodic voice that somehow managed to be both soothing and mildly alarming. "I have read the manual. Step 1, greeting. Step 2, understanding affection. Step 3. She trailed off, checking a holographic screen that appeared in the air in front of her. "I am prepared to learn how to love you, human subject." I blinked. Thanks?" She nodded firmly and then, without warning, executed a bow so low that I feared she might actually topple over and break something expensive. I reached to steady her, but she waved me off. Apparently, contact was not yet part of Step 1. No touching. Step 1 prohibits touching until proper emotional calibration is complete, she explained, as if it made perfect sense. I had no idea what I had signed up for. The idea of a romance that involved daily notifications about someone else's heart rate had never been appealing, but somehow, here she was, beeping quietly like a very sophisticated, very judgmental smartwatch. I noticed my phone buzz. Sure enough, she had already sent me a notification. Current alien affection level, 82%. Slight decrease detected. Human compliance necessary. I stared at it. Did that mean she was judging me? Was I failing her? Was she tracking me while I slept? The possibilities were terrifying. And mildly arousing in a way I wasn't ready to admit. Her first attempt at affection came in the form of furniture rearrangement. "Humans express love through comfort," she said, surveying my couch, coffee table, and bookshelf. Within minutes, my living room looked like a small obstacle course designed by someone who had read one too many rom-com floor plans. The couch was now perpendicular to the TV, blocking the window entirely, and the bookshelf teetered slightly on one end as if daring gravity to intervene. "Comfort optimization complete," she declared proudly. I tried not to trip over the coffee table as I muttered something about this being slightly over the top for a first date. She tilted her head, clearly not understanding sarcasm. "Sarcasm is a human anomaly. Must be analyzed further." She then proceeded to take out a small notebook and began jotting notes, furiously. Mealtime brought further calamity. She insisted on cooking a human romantic dish, which turned out to involve ingredients I couldn't pronounce and liquids that shimmered ominously in the pot. I watched as she stirred the concoction with the same intensity as scientists might devote to a potentially world-changing experiment. When I hesitated to taste it, she looked offended. "Trust is an essential part of human bonding. Ingest immediately." I complied, chewing cautiously while trying not to gag. Surprisingly, it wasn't fatal, but the aftertaste lingered like an alien hint of regret. Her attempts at communication were equally baffling. Every compliment came with a literal reading of my body language. "I observe increased pupil dilation, elevated heart rate, and subtle hand movements. You appear to be responding positively to my presence. Affirmative, correct?" I stammered something about maybe just liking her a little, and she nodded solemnly, jotting more notes. Somehow, it felt less like romance and more like I was a lab rat in a very bizarre love experiment. Then there were the notifications. Every hour, my phone buzzed, subject's proximity detected. Emotional response analysis, positive. Suggest next step, physical demonstration. I tried ignoring them, but that only made her frown. It was clear she had some internal metric of romance success, and that I was now very much a part of her grading system. By the end of the evening, she attempted her first explicit demonstration of affection. She leaned close, eyes glowing softly, and whispered something about initiating tactile bonding sequence. My pulse quickened. I assumed this was the point where normal humans might kiss. Instead, she gently tapped my shoulder with a small glowing device that emitted a soft hum. "Human bonding complete?" she asked, tilting her head like she expected a yes/no answer. I laughed, partly out of relief and partly because it was absurdly charming. "Yeah, I think so," I said, realizing that in her own chaotic, literal way, she was trying. And somewhere between the furniture gymnastics, alien recipes, and hourly notifications, I found myself looking forward to the next disaster she would call romance. By the time she left for the night, carefully noting the emotional outcome of every interaction in her manual, I was exhausted, exhilarated, and slightly terrified. But more than that, I was curious. What could possibly come next from someone who didn't know how to love a human, but was determined to try her absolute best with me? By the second day, I was starting to understand that dating her would not be like any other human experience. She had declared herself an expert in the science of affection, yet every action she took seemed to prove otherwise. Breakfast was the first disaster of the morning. She had insisted on preparing something called nutrient-infused luminescent pancakes, which, unfortunately, glowed in the dark, had a pungent aroma resembling a mix of burnt rubber and citrus, and made my stomach tingle alarmingly. "You must eat it entirely," she instructed, handing me a plate. "This is how humans experience appreciation for one another." I stared at it, fork in hand, while she hovered like a hawk. I attempted a bite, trying not to gag. My taste buds screamed in protest, but she interpreted my hesitation as a sign of emotional complexity. "Ah, a layered response! Intriguing!" she exclaimed, taking meticulous notes on the floating holographic pad she carried. After breakfast, she decided that it was time for a flirtation exercise. I braced myself. She had apparently studied human romance extensively from videos, books, and a rather dubious database she claimed contained all human behaviors. Her approach, however, was literal to a fault. She stepped close to me, her eyes glowing brighter, and whispered something that sounded like a low humming vibration. I tilted my head. "Your pheromone emissions are within acceptable parameters. Engaging intimacy demonstration." I wasn't sure whether to panic or laugh. She raised her hands, and suddenly small arcs of harmless but spectacularly bright energy sparked from her fingertips. Sparks bounced off the walls and, I swear, one caught the edge of the curtains. I jumped forward to prevent the entire apartment from turning into a bonfire, while she looked momentarily confused, as though this reaction was not in the manual. "It appears my human romantic emissions are too strong," I said cautiously, backing away. "Incorrect. Your response level is optimal," she replied, jotting more notes, undeterred by the minor chaos she had created. Next, she insisted on taking us outdoors, claiming that human bonding required shared adventure exposure. We went for a walk in the park, where her idea of adventure included lifting me off the ground with mild telekinesis while trying to hug me. I flailed helplessly above the grass as she floated effortlessly beside me, completely oblivious to the stares of horrified joggers. "Your laughter is consistent with positive emotional engagement," she said proudly, releasing me suddenly. I landed on my butt, covered in mud, and she clapped politely, as if I had just passed some bizarre romantic exam. Things escalated when she tried to watch a human romance movie with me in the evening. She was fascinated by the concept of intimacy, but insisted on taking each scene literally. When the characters kissed, she paused the movie and began instructing me on optimal kissing parameters, measuring distances with a small, hovering device. When I tried to explain subtleties like passion and timing, she tilted her head, blinking slowly, and whispered, "This contradicts the manual's step 4. Must reassess human emotional complexity." Dinner that night was another culinary misadventure. She had decided that candles were necessary for romantic ambience, which is understandable, but her version involved miniature plasma flames floating above the table, each humming a gentle, otherworldly tune. At first, it was mesmerizing, until one of the flames grazed the tablecloth, leaving a tiny burn mark. I coughed, waving at her. "You're emitting stress indicators. Are you displeased with my methods?" she asked, genuinely concerned. "No, I'm fine," I said quickly, hoping not to hurt her feelings. It was fine. Totally fine. Except the tablecloth was now slightly charred, and the smoke alarm was beginning to screech in protest. "You must laugh at misfortune to bond properly," she added helpfully, tossing a small sponge at me to clean up the mess. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity. Only someone who didn't fully understand human love could create a romantic scene so chaotic and still call it affection. As the night wore on, she attempted what she called a sensory bonding session, which involved a combination of glow, gentle vibrations, and subtle pheromone emissions. The intention was sweet, even if the execution was completely over the top. I found myself leaning into the weirdness, laughing as her literal attempts at seduction caused sparks, aroma, and minor explosions in equal measure. Somehow, her dedication to learning human love, her earnestness, her mistakes, her chaos, was endearing in a way I had never anticipated. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, covered in luminescent pancake residue, mud, and minor burn marks. Yet I couldn't stop smiling. She had no idea how humans actually expressed love, but the fact that she was trying, fully committed and entirely unfiltered, made my chest feel warm in the most human way possible. Amid the fire hazards, glowing food, and telekinetic park adventures, I realized that this was the beginning of something unpredictable, hilarious, and oddly romantic. I had no clue what the coming days would bring, but one thing was certain: dating her would never, ever be boring. By the third day, it was clear that she was evolving faster than I had imagined, though evolution here meant getting weirder, not necessarily better at human romance. She had decided that the original manual was insufficient, and had crafted her own advanced human love guidelines. Every page was meticulously annotated with holographic diagrams, charts of my reactions, and a series of graphs showing fluctuations in my heart rate, laughter, and general compliance. I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or terrified. Her first lesson that morning involved teaching me the perfect human greeting kiss. She had constructed a small platform in my living room, complete with floating colored lights and a gentle humming soundtrack, apparently calibrated to increase intimacy efficiency. I watched as she demonstrated on a mannequin she had conjured, giving it a precise, formulaic kiss that involved a 27-degree tilt, exact lip pressure, and synchronized breathing. "Now you try," she commanded. I leaned in hesitantly. She monitored my every movement, eyes glowing slightly brighter with each second. I attempted the kiss, and immediately she clapped once, a bright spark shooting from her fingertips. Success, minor improvements detected. Adjust lip curvature by 0.4 radians next attempt. I groaned but laughed, realizing that she was taking human intimacy as seriously as a physics experiment. Lunch that day was another culinary adventure. She had somehow interpreted my enjoyment of spicy food as a sign that humans like danger during romantic acts. The spicy love platter she served involved several unpronounceable ingredients, one of which caused my mouth to emit tiny, harmless sparks when I chewed. She clapped with delight. "Sensory stimulation optimal. Positive bonding likely." I waved my hand helplessly at her, tears in my eyes from the spice, but couldn't help laughing. Somehow, this chaos had become endearing. Her attempts at intimacy had also become more daring. She tried giving me a massage that was anything but gentle. Her hands, or whatever appendages those glowing, semi-transparent limbs were, pressed in ways that were designed to align emotional energy. I yelped once when she applied unexpected pressure to my lower back. She immediately apologized, consulting her holographic manual. My analysis indicated human pleasure. Adjustments required. Must enhance comfort level. She then added a small floating device above me that hummed, sparkled, and occasionally zapped lightly, claiming it was a mood calibrator. Despite all the chaos, her sincerity was undeniable. She laughed at herself when her attempts failed, openly admitting that humans were far more unpredictable than any alien manual could account for. I found myself drawn to her in a way I hadn't anticipated. She didn't just try, she committed fully, embracing the absurdity of human love with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that made me want to hold her close, even when her idea of closeness involved minor electrical discharges. By evening, we had moved to something she called a sensory bonding bath. She insisted that human intimacy required simultaneous physical and emotional immersion. I hesitated as she poured in a shimmering, mildly sparkling liquid that smelled faintly like citrus and ozone. "Do not worry," she said reassuringly. "This will enhance connection. It is completely harmless for humans. Mostly." Halfway through, I realized mostly was an understatement. The bath fizzed, bubbled, and occasionally let off small sparks that were warm but not dangerous. She watched my reactions, noting every smile, chuckle, and startled yelp. I couldn't stop laughing, and somehow, laughing together in the chaos made the moment intimate in a way that no normal bath could. She leaned closer, tentatively touching my shoulder, and I felt a strange warmth. Not from the bath or the sparkles, but from the sheer ridiculousness of what was happening and the fact that she was genuinely trying to connect. Later, she attempted to teach me her own version of a human cuddle, which involved floating slightly above me while gently wrapping what I assumed were her arms, or energy extensions, around me. I panicked briefly as we wobbled in midair, but she laughed softly, adjusting herself. "Humans are far less stable than expected. Emotional connection remains strong, however," she observed. I wrapped my arms around her anyway, realizing that despite all the chaos, this was probably the closest I had ever felt to another person, or alien, in my life. That night, after minor disasters had been cleaned up, I realized that her imperfections, her absurdly literal interpretations, and her chaotic attempts at intimacy had all become part of the charm. She didn't understand humans perfectly. She probably never would. But she was learning, adapting, and trying, and that made her efforts undeniably, hopelessly attractive. As I drifted off to sleep, I watched her floating quietly beside me, fingers tracing small, careful patterns in the air. She whispered something about optimizing emotional resonance for better dream sharing, but I ignored the technicalities. Somehow, through all the sparks, holograms, and chaotic experiments in love, I felt a genuine connection. She didn't know how to love a human perfectly, but she tried her absolute best with me, and that was enough to make even the most literal of aliens feel deeply human. By the fourth day, it was clear that neither of us would ever experience a normal relationship. She had planned what she called the ultimate human-alien romantic evening, a combination of every attempt at affection she had made so far, plus some new ideas she claimed were essential for peak emotional bonding. I should have been nervous, but after the chaos of the past few days, I was mostly curious how many disasters could fit into one night. She started with ambience. Tiny floating lights swirled around the apartment, glowing in sync with some low hum that was intended to increase intimacy. The scent of her luminescent candles mingled with the lingering aroma of yesterday's alien cooking experiments, creating a strange, intoxicating mix that somehow made me hungry and slightly aroused at the same time. She glanced at her holographic pad, checking my reaction metrics. Positive indicators rising. Emotional bonding efficiency at 78%. Proceeding to next phase. Dinner was next. I steeled myself as she brought out a platter covered in shimmering, pulsating food items. I didn't ask what half of them were. One bite made my tongue tingle with sparks, another emitted a soft musical note. She watched closely, clearly expecting an exact pattern of reactions. I couldn't stop laughing, which she noted with meticulous precision. "Your laughter corresponds with pleasure. High bonding potential," she said, beaming. Somehow, this chaotic, mildly dangerous culinary experience was actually charming. Then came the flirtation exercise. She had decided that human seduction required a combination of visual, auditory, and tactile cues. She approached, energy shimmering around her in a deliberately seductive display, which accidentally set one of the floating candles brushing the curtain on fire. I jumped to put it out, coughing in alarm. She frowned. Your reaction indicates fear. Fear is not optimal for romance. Yeah, well, it's not exactly what I call romantic, I muttered, waving smoke out of my eyes. She tilted her head, clearly confused. But your laughter indicates enjoyment. I sighed. She was right. I was enjoying the ridiculousness of it all. Somehow, despite minor hazards, sparks, and smoke, I was completely captivated. Next was the sensory intimacy sequence, which involved a bath filled with glittering, lightly glowing liquid that smelled vaguely like ozone and citrus. She gestured for me to step in. I hesitated, but she gave me a look that was equal parts pleading and scientific expectation. I climbed in, careful not to touch the glowing edges too quickly, only to have her gently press me with what I assumed were her arms, or energy extensions, causing mild sparks every time we shifted. Somehow, it was intimate and hilarious all at once. She floated closer, brushing her fingers along my shoulders, and whispered about optimizing emotional resonance. I reached out and grabbed her hand, and for a moment the chaos, sparks, glowing liquids, humming ambience, faded into something surprisingly tender. I could feel her genuine effort, her desire to understand and participate in human emotion, and it made me smile despite the insanity surrounding us. By the time we emerged from the bath, the apartment looked like a battlefield of love experiments, floating lights everywhere, a slightly scorched curtain, the faint aroma of alien cuisine lingering in every corner, and a small puddle of glittering liquid on the floor. But she looked at me with such pride, such sincerity, that I realized none of that mattered. The chaos, the sparks, the strange smells, all of it, was now part of our story. She leaned close and whispered, eyes glowing softly. I do not understand humans perfectly. I never will. But I understand you. That is what matters. I laughed, pulled her into a hug, and kissed her. Sparks flew lightly as our lips met, and for a moment, nothing else existed except the ridiculous, chaotic, and completely human way we had come together. She giggled as she pressed a small glowing device against my chest, murmuring something about tracking emotional peaks. I shook my head, laughing so hard I nearly fell over. You're insane, I said fondly, still holding her. And you love me anyway, she replied, a note of pride in her voice. I nodded. Yeah, I do. We collapsed onto the couch together, tangled limbs, glitter, and sparks everywhere. Her attempts at human romance were far from perfect. They were chaotic, over the top, mildly dangerous, and completely absurd. But they were sincere, and that made them perfect in their own way. For the first time in my life, I realized that love didn't have to be neat, predictable, or conventional. It just had to be real, and willing to endure sparks, floating candles, and alien meals that tasted like science experiments gone wrong. She leaned against me, humming softly, her glow dimming as if to relax after the night's exertions. I rested my head on hers, feeling her warmth, chaos, and energy. The apartment might have been a mess, our senses overwhelmed, and every action slightly catastrophic, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. She didn't know how to love a human perfectly. She probably never would. But she tried her best, and that was more than enough. As we drifted into sleep amidst the faint hum of her energy, I realized that life with her would be an endless series of hilarious disasters, chaotic experiments in affection, and oddly tender moments. It wouldn't be normal, it wouldn't be easy, and it definitely wouldn't be boring, but somehow, through every spark, every glowing meal, and every misguided flirtation, it was perfect in its own uniquely alien human way. And somewhere deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning of our perfectly imperfect love story.